Welcome back to Show and Teller. I am here with the most incredible, most fantastic, most increíble guest that I am so happy to have join with us today on Show and Teller. It's rare when you have somebody who knows so much about one topic and just about life in general, but I feel that I have a real expert who is here today, and I just feel that I'm going to be learning so much on this episode. And when I asked our next guest, who you will find out very soon who this guest is, I was like, score, unbelievable, I'm so happy. So without further ado, I have Miss Charlotte Korchak, who is here today, and I want to tell the audience that Charlotte is a leader in the Jewish world. She is an activist. She's an educator. She is wise beyond her years. She knows everything you need to know about Israel, everything you need to know about the conflict and what is taking place. And I just wanted to bring Charlotte on to come and pick her brain about what the heck is going on. And without further ado, that was my intro.
No pressure.
No pressure at all. Charlotte, welcome to our show.
With that intro, yeah.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Yeah, hanging in there. Not easy times, but I'm doing okay.
You're hanging in there?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we all are, right?
We all are hanging in there. We're hanging in there. But I would say we're more than just surviving. I think we're thriving to some degree.
Yeah. While also holding very difficult things at the same time, right?
Correct.
We're seeing photos of our brothers and they look like they're coming out of death camps. So it's a lot. It's a lot. So yes, it's remarkable that even in those circumstances, we as a Jewish people can still thrive.
So tell me a little bit about yourself, Charlotte. Can you tell me a little bit about your upbringing? What brought you to where you're at today? And we'll go linearly, and then I'll, based on what you're going to say, I will narrow in and boom, we'll go there.
Sure. So try to keep this quick, but I was born and raised in Los Angeles. I lived in LA until I was 9, right here in the Jewish community in Beverly Hills. I went to Hillel, so modern Orthodox Jewish education. Went to Beth Jacob, where my grandfather was president back in the 1970s.
Wow.
And then when I was 9, my parents decided to uproot me from the nice little Jewish bubble that I had been growing up in, and they plopped me down, a much bigger Jewish bubble in the land of Israel.
Was that hard for you?
Oh, very.
At age 9?
Very. I felt like I was being pulled away from everything that I know.
Your friends?
My friends, everything that I had experienced. My whole life was in LA.
Did you fight them?
Oh, yeah. I was kicking and screaming. Yeah. And then I got to Israel, and I should say the land of Israel, because my family actually moved first to a Jewish community in Judea and Samaria, or what some might call a settlement in the West Bank.
Okay.
And I always use all the terminology to make sure that everyone understands and to also not show my politics, because I'm an educator and I try to really avoid showing my opinion when I teach. And I say the land of Israel because the Judea and Samaria was never officially annexed into the state of Israel or absorbed into the state of Israel. It's a territory under Israeli control. So again, I try to be accurate about my language. But yeah, I mean, so not only was it moving me to the land of Israel, but to a small town in the middle of nowhere, coming from a huge city. So it was a culture shock on many levels. And then we spent a year in that community, tiny town. And I always joke that we discovered very quickly that small towns were not for us. Like, our neighbors wanted to be our friends, and we were just like, no. And that's when we moved to Jerusalem, the biggest city. But I should say, living there, it was a good soft landing. Everyone there was mostly American, Anglo. We lived in a small community called Neve Eliza, and I could speak English with all my friends. And I had a best friend named Rachel, who had also just made Aliyah, and we kind of were like partners in crime together as like 9 and 10-year-olds who ran around our community and caused chaos. And I bring up Rachel just because she's a very important part of my story later on. About 4 years later, when I was 14, a suicide bomber went into that community. A bunch of my friends were out eating pizza, and he stood in the middle of them and blew himself up. And Rachel was one of his 3 victims. So as much as I was only there for a year, it left obviously an indelible mark on me, and also really gave me an inside view of the settlement community and what that was, which enables me as an educator to speak about it with a lot more authority, I think.
So that left quite a
I feel like every day doing the work that I do, to a certain extent, like I'm there for them and their voices and the many people who we've lost who can't speak, and I can be their voice and I can tell their stories.
So at age 14, you're there in Israel.
So we'd moved from the settlement after a year to Jerusalem, and then we lived in Jerusalem for 4 more years until I was basically almost 15, and then we moved back to the U.S.
And how long was your stint in the U.S. from 15 until when?
25.
Okay. And you went to...
Well, I should also say in those 4 years that I was in Jerusalem, just not to skip it, because we moved there and then 2 years later, the second Intifada broke out.
And can you explain
of
the audience what the second Intifada
Yeah, a word that
was?
we've heard a lot lately,
Yes.
Intifada, globalizing the Intifada. Well, for me, the Intifada was murdering Israelis, right? It was 2 years of intense violence, suicide bombings, stabbings, shootings. I mean, friends of my friends who were murdered by being beaten to death with rocks in a cave.
Was there an actual moment in time that there was like, we hit a button and the second Intifada started, and then was there like, there was a timeline and then the second Intifada ended?
Sort of, yeah. I mean, usually the starting point is September of 2000.
And what sparked that?
So a lot of people would argue that it was Ariel Sharon who decided to go walk on the Temple Mount, which caused a riot. That being said, if you actually look into what actually was going on, the Palestinian Authority very much had planted seeds of incitement and were waiting for that kind of trigger, and they used that as a trigger. But the incitement was already there, and it was kind of bubbling under the surface, and then it exploded. And so most people put the start date at September of 2000, and then October was just a month of a lot of rioting in the West Bank and Judea and Samaria and in Gaza. And then slowly we started to see a lot more terror in Israel, suicide bombings, again, stabbings, shootings. And it progressed from September of 2000 into 2001. We all remember some famous attacks like the Sbarro bombing in Jerusalem. That was August of 2001. Getting into 2002 was the worst time period. February and March of 2002 were the deadliest months of the Intifada. February was when my 3 friends were killed. March became known as Bloody March. There was almost an attack every day, and it culminated.
And how many people were dying? We're talking about in the
over
hundreds?
1,000 died over the course of the Intifada. And at the end of March of 2002 was the deadliest suicide bombing in Israel's history, which was March 27th. It was known as the Passover Massacre, the night that a suicide bomber blew himself up in the Park Hotel in Netanya as everyone was sitting down for the Passover Seder. And it killed 30 people, injured 100. I should say somebody very close to me, a colleague of mine at Stand With Us, actually was there. He was a young kid. He lost a grandparent in that attack. And that was really what pushed Israel to also change their methodology in terms of how they combat terror, going back into the areas that they had withdrawn from to try to make peace with the Palestinians and really kind of take back control because of how chaotic things had gotten. And then a couple months later, crazy enough, as I was living in Gilo, which is this neighborhood on the southern edge of Jerusalem that looks down onto Bethlehem, they had launched this operation. They went into Bethlehem, and so I could hear the war, essentially, right there. It was right next door. The tank fire, the artillery fire. And then June 18th, 2002, I did my normal routine. I got up. I had a broken leg. That was the only thing that was different. I got up. I went and got on my bus to go to school. It was the 32 bus out of Gilo. And usually I would sit in the back because I always thought I was safer in the back of a bus. Suicide bombings, they usually were in the front, in the center. So maybe in the back you could see them, maybe you could duck, maybe you could take preventative measures. But that day I sat right behind the driver and drove to school, and everything was fine. Everything was normal. And then I got a phone call from my father, who had already started to work his way back to the United States. He was in Las Vegas where we were moving. And he called me and he said, "Shar?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Who is this?" And he said, "It's your father." And I could know that it was my dad, but like, "Why are you calling me? I'm in school. This is weird. I had a cell phone, but it was 2002. Like, why are you calling me?" And I said, "Abba, what's up?" And he said, "I just wanted to hear your voice." I said, "Dad, you're freaking me out. Like, what's going on?" He said, "Shar, a suicide bomber just blew up the 32 bus." We all thought, it was like an hour that they all thought I had died. My mom saw the headline. She was convinced that I was gone. It's weird, that story is personal to me, but it's also a very important story for Israel because the next day was the day that Israel decided to build the security barrier. So you talked about the end of the second Intifada. Really, Israel implemented these measures where they went back into the major Palestinian city centers, which was Operation Defensive Shield, launched in April of 2002, and then the building of the security barrier. And those two steps, along with more intelligence gathering and more direct counterterrorism into the communities, is what started to lead to a decline in terror. And so the end date for the Intifada
because
usually...
there wasn't as much of a gateway for people to be coming in from these...
Yeah. I mean, funny enough, if you go back to the second Intifada, 98% of the terror came out of the West Bank, out of Judea and Samaria. Almost none came out of Gaza. And you ask why, and the answer is simple. There was already a fence around Gaza. There was no barrier between Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, and Israel. And so terrorists could just walk right in, which is what they did. And with a suicide vest on. And that's what happened that morning. A terrorist had walked from Bethlehem into my community and then down into the neighboring Arab community and got on that bus and blew himself up. And so that's why they decided to build the security barrier. And so with all those measures, you saw a slow reduction in terror that eventually, it wasn't that they stopped trying, it was that we just got more effective. Israel got more effective at stopping it. And so people usually put the end date around to the end of 2004 into 2005 as really terror started to decrease in a dramatic way. I mean, the security barrier eventually will reduce terror by over 90% in Israel.
And that's when there was maybe an end to the second Intifada. That's what happened.
Yeah. And then we started. I mean, then there was the withdrawal from Gaza. We started trying to negotiate again. There was the withdrawal from Gaza
in 2005.
Exactly, August of 2005. And meanwhile, at that point, my family had already moved back to the United States because the economy had crashed, so our business had gone bankrupt. So my family decided to move from Jerusalem to Las Vegas, of all places, from the holy city to the city of sin.
That must have also been a very shocking wake-up call for you to go from being, again, in Israel, a holy place. Now you have your identity. Now you have your friendships. Now you have your community. And now it's like, now going from holy city to sin city.
Yep, exactly. And like, I show up at a gas station down the street from my new house and people are like playing slot machines at the gas station. And I go into a school that is remarkably diverse. I mean, 30% black, 30% Hispanic, 30% white, mostly Mormon, and like 8 Jews. And I had just lived through terror. I had just buried my friend 6 months earlier. I had gone through things that like no 14, 15-year-old should have ever had to go through. And I felt like I had lived years beyond what I had lived. And I was now side by side with other people my age who just had no understanding of what I had been through.
I want to ask you a question that's going to deviate a little bit from the timeline. Most kids, you ask them, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be when you get older? And a lot of people will be like, I want to be a doctor. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be the next Kobe Bryant.
Yeah.
At what point in your growing up, in your upbringing, did you say, you know what? I am Charlotte and I am passionate about this and this is the direction that I want to go? And we don't even know really at this point, because I didn't make quite the intro, so we don't really know yet what you do and what you're involved in.
Yeah.
So why don't you give us just a little bit of that, like what thrust you into the arena that you're in right now, and what was the inspiration that led you to where you're at right now? So if you can give us a little bit of that story, and then it'll tie it into where we're at.
It's funny, you triggered me a little bit when you asked, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Because I had lost friends and then I kept losing friends. And so I never, for some reason, I had this like feeling like I wasn't going to grow up. So I never thought, like, I didn't know what I was kind of like, I think I'm going to die young. It's very weird. I had this sense of like, I think I'm going to die young. And I really had no idea what I wanted to do until I went to college. And so just to now, spoiler, let's end the spoiler. I now am the founder and senior educator of a new nonprofit organization called the Jerusalem Education Institute, which is there to basically create a renovation on Israel education for the next generation. Change the way we teach Israel, change the way we talk about Israel, change the way the next generation understands Israel and has a relationship with Israel. And I got into it when I was in college because, you know, I went off to college again, like I said, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I went to the University of Southern California. And one of the reasons I went to USC was because, well, first of all, my dad went there, so I was a legacy, and Trojan. I was part of the Trojan family well before I officially became part of the family. And they had they gave you the option to kind of, you could dabble in all their different schools and take a lot of different extracurriculars and really try to discover what you wanted to do. You could even build your own major at USC. So it appealed to me because I really had no idea what I was passionate about. So I go to USC, I spend my first 6 months trying to figure things out. I always joke, I spent my first 6 months being a normal college student, so I don't really remember much of the first 6 months. And then second semester, I was walking on campus one day, and I came face to face with an apartheid wall, which is a wall that they put up on campus. It's trying to kind of look like the security barrier, what they would call the apartheid wall, which, again, as somebody who almost died in the suicide bombing that led to the construction of that barrier, I have an intimate understanding.
Before you get there, define apartheid.
Sure. Apartheid was a system of government in South Africa that discriminated based on race, and essentially whites were first class, blacks were third class, and in the middle there was a category called colored, which was not discriminatory in South Africa. It was an actual ethnic term, and basically it was institutionalized racism. And so they put up an apartheid wall accusing Israel of being an apartheid state, which of course makes no sense. Israel's a democratic state. It's been a democracy since the day that it was born, when it declared that all of its citizens would have equal rights no matter their race, their religion, or their gender, which in 1948, one could argue was actually pretty progressive, given the Middle East and even other parts of the world. And so it's the opposite of what Israel is. And of course there's racism in Israel. Of course there's discrimination, no doubt about it. And that's every democracy. But the real question is not if there is or isn't racism, it's how do you deal with that racism and how can citizens fight against discrimination. And of course, being a democracy, you can protest and you can speak out and you can run for office if you want. You obviously have the right to vote, and everyone in Israel has the right to vote. Now, I just gave you a very, if I can say so myself, really good, eloquent answer on how to address the issue.
I would agree that was eloquent. That was
Thank
really
you.
good. Yes.
But I've honed that answer for the last 20 years. But there I was, an 18-year-old kid, and I'm now about to turn 38, so we're talking 20 years ago. And I didn't even know, I barely knew what apartheid was.
So you saw this.
I saw this wall.
And did you say, did it trigger you? Did you know?
Very much so.
Okay.
Very much so. I for the first time in my life, I was witnessing demonization of Israel. Let's understand that the year is 2005. 2006. This is the spring of 2006, which means there's no social media. Like, Facebook was just a thing, okay? There was no
on
Instagram.
Harvard and Columbia, and it was in the Ivy League
Yeah, it was
schools.
the EDU, and well, it had reached now. I had one, USC. It was all
Right.
the universities, but
Right.
there was no news feed. There was
Right.
no, what we know of social media today
Right.
didn't exist back then.
Right.
So I wasn't exposed to anti-Zionism growing up. I didn't even know what that was, And so this was the first time I saw it, and it wasn't on my phone where I could just keep scrolling. It was in my face, on my campus. And for the first time in my life, I felt like my identity was truly under attack. And I didn't fully understand that identity. I couldn't have told you in that moment exactly what Zionism was, but I knew I was a Zionist, and I knew that I loved Israel. And here I saw people attacking Israel and demonizing Israel. And so I, of course, went up and I started screaming. I didn't know what else to do. And
What were you screaming?
just, my friends were killed. You don't know, like this. You guys don't know what you're talking about. I was there, and I was deeply emotional because, again, it was still raw. It was still fresh for me what had happened.
Now, would you say that in 2006, this was probably the start of this kind of
Campus anti-Israel activism? No, I think if you go back, the organization that I will go on to work for right after college was Stand With Us, which I'm still very affiliated with and love the organization.
How many years did you work for them?
I worked for Stand With Us for 14 and a half years.
Wow.
From basically about a year after I graduated. I did a little bit in between, a couple of hilarious jobs in between, just random jobs in between. But yeah, I started in 2010 and I finished December 31st of 2024. So it was about 14 and a half years that I was with them. I ended as international senior educator, where I got to travel the world and teach about Israel. Thank God, Baruch Hashem. And then I started JEI. And so Stand With Us, they really helped me with my activism on campus.
So again, explain to us, when was that moment you said, I'm going to now do
Great.
this as my
profession. Great.
Or my passion project,
Great.
or this
Yeah.
is just a short-term gig.
Yeah.
And
So I was saying campus activism, by the way, anti-Israel activism started around 2001. That's when Stand With Us was born, and so many other organizations were born. Hasbara Fellowships was born. The David Project was born. Even Birthright came around at that time. And that was in response to what we were seeing on campuses. Now, for me, I saw the wall. I freaked out. I found people on campus to kind of work with. There was already like a defunct pro-Israel club, Zionist club on my campus that me and my sister, who was also at USC, started to revive. And then we found the TRIP, Hasbara Fellowships, which is an AISH program. And so I went on it the summer of 2006. And look, I loved Israel. I had a lot of friends in Israel, which meant that my Hasbara fellowship trip was going to be, go learn during the day.
And go party at night.
And I partied. And I mean, when you're 18, 19, you don't have to sleep. So I was out all night. I'd sleep maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours.
Come to the classes the next day.
But when I was coming to the classes, I found myself, if I was like dozing off, I would get up and I would pace in the back of the room. And I would be taking notes. And there was this moment on that trip where I was learning and I was just like, I could do this for the rest. I love this. I could do this for the rest of my life. I want to know everything. And I said, I could learn about this for the rest of my life. And that was the moment when I knew this was going to be my career path. And I had an amazing, what they were called back then were campus coordinators, which is eventually what I became for Stand With Us. I had an incredible campus coordinator who really was my mentor and remains my mentor and is actually one of my board members now for my new organization. And his name is Elron, and he really, I wanted to be him. And he guided me through, my years of activism at USC. And it was just such a natural kind of progression. And as I was an activist, what I also started to do was teach on my campus. Like I started to have sessions for my club saying, let's learn a little bit of Israeli history. And then I started to realize that education was really where I wanted to be, that I wanted to be an educator more than necessarily an activist. Mm-hmm. And then I learned through the years the difference of those two things.
And can you explain the difference?
Yeah, I mean, an activist, you're out there every day, and a lot of times it's defending, it's also promoting. There's elements, those are kind of the words that I think of, defending and promoting. People oftentimes use the word advocacy, which advocacy is a lot more defensive, I think, rather than activism, which I think is a lot more active, which can be positive, but also involves reaction sometimes. Mm-hmm. Education is giving people the information, but that also means that you don't just give out the positive information. You don't just give out the information that somebody needs to counter a claim. You give out, you teach them everything, which sometimes can be the good, the bad, and the ugly of a topic. And the more I started to learn about Israel, the more I realized people do need to know the full picture. And I actually think that creates better activists when you know the full picture. And you could speak from a place of authority and a place of more credibility. And so as an educator, it's hard sometimes because when you're in the place of activism, it's defend, but sometimes there are things that aren't defensible or that you don't need to be defending, and you can just condemn or call out, and that doesn't in any way impede Israel's character, because every country has flaws, every country has an extreme, and that in no way should dictate or help somebody determine what that country actually stands for. And what I think more than anything, what I always say is, I am the biggest Zionist. I wear it on my sleeve, and I wear it around my neck, and I don't ever take it off.
I don't know if we've defined it yet, but
we should
define Zionism for
Sure.
our audience, please.
I have a very quick and simple definition for Zionism. Zionism is the belief in a Jewish state in the land of Israel. And I'm going to say it again. Zionism is the belief in a Jewish state in the land of Israel. Now, it's so much more than that. I mean, it's our identity. It's our love of this land and this country. But I keep it simple because Zionists are very different. There's a whole spectrum of Zionists, from right to left, from religious to secular, everything in between. And what I love so much about Zionism is that it's such a pluralistic movement. And again, the more I learned about
going back to your definition that a state of Israel,
a belief in a Jewish state in the land of Israel, and you can believe in a Jewish state in the land of Israel, but what's a Jewish state? What are going to be the borders of the land of Israel? What's the land of Israel? There's so much argument, debate, and can be disagreement, but we are all, it's a unity with a lack of uniformity. And that's the broad, that when I say the belief in a Jewish state in the land of Israel, everybody, every Zionist is in that category. Then we can unpack it and argue and debate. I was just I'm currently in LA because I'm training students at the Stand With Us conference, and we just did a program called Across the Spectrum, where we put everyone in a room, and one side of the room is agree and the other side of the room is disagree, and we read out statements, and students can kind of walk along the room, and everyone's silent. Nobody's asking, where are you gonna, everyone's doing it based on their own perspective. And you can stand in the middle, which is unsure, right? And I'm watching this and I literally got choked up. I'm tearing up there because I'm standing there looking at these people who are all Zionists. They're all there for the same reason, but they're standing on totally different sides of the spectrum with each question. And I'm sitting there just almost crying, because we live in a world where We don't have that anymore, unity with a lack of uniformity. People think to be unified, you have to agree with me. You have to agree with everything that I say. And if you don't, I'm blocking you, I'm shunning you, I'm canceling you. And within Zionism, that's never been the case. We're together, we're one. And more importantly, when we have to defend Zionism, when we have to defend Israel's right to exist, none of our differences matter.
None of our differences matter as Jews or
as Zionists.
As Zionists.
It doesn't matter if I'm right wing and you're left wing and I'm a two-state solution and you're a one-state solution, or when people are saying that we can't exist, those differences don't matter. And we can go to a rally and stand united. But then again, when we are having internal conversations, right, when it's just us in a room like we were at that conference, we can unpack our differences. We can unpack our disagreements. And we can discuss them. And I just don't think we live in a world anymore where people sit around and talk to people who they might disagree with.
Yeah.
They block them.
Agreed.
And then we just create more and more more and more of an echo chamber. And I think that's tragic. And so again, going back to what I was saying about being a Zionist, I've now learned so much about Israel. And part of that is also learning the Palestinian narrative and what they've gone through, and again, the good and the bad of Israel. And I'm still an avid Zionist. And so JEI, the Jerusalem Education Institute, when I think about the education that we provide, some people are so scared. Well, if you teach a young person the bad of Israel, they're going to turn anti-Zionist. No, it's how you teach it. It's how you frame it. And that's what I want to bring is being able to teach the full picture, because I know that somebody can turn out
unadulterated. You want to give it out.
Because I am the example of somebody who learned it all, and not only am I not less Zionist, I'm more Zionist because of it. And I'm scared. I'm scared for the next generation of Jewish people. I'm scared to see Jews who are turning on Israel because I think their education failed them.
So let me ask you, it might be a good segue, but being that you've been part of this since 2006, and organizations like Hasbara and Stand With Us have been around since 2001, was October 7th, 2023 an inevitable event? Was it something that was bound to happen, meant to happen? Was there something that could have been done differently that would have hindered the tragedies of what took place on that day?
Yes. No, it was not an inevitable event.
Was not an inevitable.
It was not an inevitable event. No, absolutely not. Look, I have like two hats that I wear, because I am an educator, and when you're an educator and a historian, you have to step outside of religion, right? You have to step outside of theology. But I'm also a religious Jew.
So good.
And I've studied,
so share that with us.
Exactly, and I've studied Torah, and I've studied Jewish history. And there's a way to look at it from a secular perspective. There's a way to look at it from a religious perspective.
So maybe
let's go back a little bit.
Let's share
a little
so, with both, if you can.
Yeah. Well, when you go back and look at the destruction of the first and the second temple, right? From a religious perspective, we would say first temple was destroyed because of the three cardinal sins, right? Adultery, murder, and avodah zarah, idolatry.
Yes.
Idolatry, adultery, and murder. Yeah. And then the second temple was destroyed because of baseless hatred. Those are our religious understandings, right? And that means that we played a role in our own destruction, which is a very hard thing to say even nowadays, right? That we played a role. And that God was part of that, right? That God is kind of saying to us, this is where you screwed up, fix it. And we also know that because 70 years after the destruction of the first temple, we rebuilt the second, because we understand from our religious perspective that we corrected those three cardinal sins, right? And then of course we get to the second temple and destroyed by baseless hatred, senseless hatred, which means we haven't rebuilt the third temple, so that's obviously still around.
Baseless hatred means a lack of tolerance, and what's mine is mine is mine is mine, and just a lack of boundaries, a lack of clear respect for one another. And
within the Jewish community.
Correct.
I mean, it was the Jews, there were multiple different sects of Judaism, and they were fighting with each other. And that division is what we believe weakened us, which then led to our destruction, right? And that's, yes, there was, of course, we believe God's hand was in that. But if you look at then all of it from a secular, not godly perspective, if you remove God from the equation, even on the most basic level, the splitting of the kingdom of Israel into the kingdom of Israel in the north and the Judean kingdom to the south, that already weakened, right, the Israelite nation, right, because we were divided. And so then the Assyrians were able to come down and destroy the northern kingdom of Israel in 722. And then the Babylonians were able to then come down. And at that point, even within the kingdom of Judea, there was we were weak. There was a division, and that enabled them to destroy us. Same thing then with the Romans. There was real division at that point amongst the Jews, and that weakening enabled them. Of course, when you're weak, you're more vulnerable. You're more vulnerable. Sorry, couldn't enunciate that.
We got it.
And
we understood.
yeah, and so when you jump to modern Israel, first of all, we should also note that the first kingdom started to fracture in the 8th decade. The second kingdom started to fracture in its 8th decade. We are now in Israel's 8th decade. And that's very scary to think about.
I didn't know that.
It's one of those things that I feel like I'm constantly fighting against. That like we have.
And what do we know about 8? 8
is the next level.
It's the next level. It's supernatural.
Yeah.
There's almost, because we know that within nature, 1 through 7, the world was created
7 days.
7 days. There's 7 days of the week. There's the 7-year cycle. These are just some numbers of 7.
Yeah.
And
8
is the supernatural.
The next level.
The next level. A baby boy has his Brit Milah on the 8th day. Supernatural. Transcends Shabbat, which is on the 7th day.
Yep.
So that's interesting. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, and it's a little scary, right? We have 4 more years? If my math is correct right now, 4 more years. And that's scary to me. And so when you look at what was going on leading up to October 7th, we were so divided. We were so divided.
We were so divided as a modern Jewish nation.
Israel, specifically inside of Israel.
Meaning?
Politics. There were protests every week in Israel. Right? So let's trace it.
I'm this type of Israeli. I'm this type of Israeli.
Yeah.
I'm this type of Jew. I'm this type of Jew.
Yeah, and more importantly, what was going on with the government and the reforms. Yeah, and so you have the election of November 2022, right? And Israel ends up with its most right-wing government it's ever had in January they're sworn in essentially in late December. January, they announced this package of judicial reforms, which some might call reform, some called a judicial coup. And there was an immediate reaction where mass protests begins. Every Saturday night, there's a protest. And the country was getting weaker because there was this division, pro-government, anti-government, pro-reform, anti-reform. And to the point that and then there was, the protest included reservists saying, we're not going to show up. We can't defend a country that might potentially not be a democracy anymore if these reforms go through as we believe if they go through as they're laid out. That was the fear. And that's weakening us to the point that, when they were about to pass the reforms, the defense minister gets up and makes this speech because he's so scared. And he says, you have to stop this because we're becoming more vulnerable to our enemies. And that, of course, prompts Bibi to fire him, which prompts the largest spontaneous protest we've ever seen in Israeli history. Over 500,000 people. Some people say even 600,000 who went out in the streets across Israel.
When you say 500,000 people, we're talking about 500,000 Jews.
And probably also not Jews, Israelis.
But fighting amongst each other.
Protesting against the government, right?
Yes.
Which is a Jewish government. I mean, that's not all Jewish, but the government of the Jewish state. And man, the divisions, I can't even, it's hard for me to explain how I felt in 2023 before October 7th and how painful it was to be in Israel. And
because wasn't there an incident that took place in Knesset and Yom Kippur? I mean, there was
in Tel Aviv where they wanted to put up a mechitza, a divider, right, to separate men and women, and people came and tore it down. I mean, that was right before October 7th.
Right.
And so it wasn't inevitable, but unfortunately, our leadership in Israel were not heeding the warnings. Maybe they should have learned a little bit more of ancient Jewish history to understand that when we're in this position, we open ourselves up to being attacked.
And now you're speaking as the spiritual Charlotte, or the historic.
Both.
Yes.
Both. But of course, God's hand in it. God's hand is in it. Of course it is. It always is, right? And then we had an enemy who knew us really well. The head of Hamas in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, knew Israelis. He understood Jews very well. He spent 20 years in our jails. We saved his life. That told him everything also about who we are and how we value life. But also he saw when we're divided, we're weak. And then there were just the natural, we didn't heed the warnings. There were warnings and we should have done more. And then the last thing is just we underestimated our enemy. We thought Hamas were just a ragtag bunch of punks who, even if they did cross the border, how are they going to stand up to the IDF? And by underestimating them.
our leadership didn't know the extent of how big this October 7th really could be.
No. And I'll give them some credit. I think, look, we had sealed the borders of Gaza essentially, and there were smuggling tunnels from Egypt into Gaza. But the president of Egypt, El-Sisi, he had flooded the tunnels. He had destroyed the tunnels. And we were very much convinced that those tunnels didn't exist anymore. And we came to learn after October 7th that Hamas had been probably bribing, no, not probably, we're definitely bribing Egyptian military officers who were stationed on that border to let them smuggle under the border again. And so Israel had no idea how much they had stockpiled. They had no idea the capabilities that they had been able to develop. And again, maybe they should have, given our intelligence, but Yahya Sinwar also understood our intelligence. So he understood that how not to tell anybody. He knew to keep the date and the details of October 7th very close to his chest. And very few people knew the extent of it. People knew little bits, little pieces, but not the extent.
But with the Mossad and who we are in our intelligence, couldn't tap that.
No, because he knew. He knew. I have to tell it. I can't tell more than 3 people.
But there were hundreds, if not thousands.
No, thousands.
That breached the walls.
Yeah.
So he had to have gotten it out to.
They knew they were preparing for an attack, and that's why we saw them training for an attack.
Right.
But again, we saw small bunches of them. We didn't think it was thousands. So they knew there was an attack at some point, but and we had those intelligence reports that said they're going to try to attack this many people.
The young girls at the gate, or at the
the
stands.
Tatzpitaniyot, the lookouts. Yeah, they were watching them train. But again, the IDF said, but if they cross, it'd be about 100. Like, how many could get across the border? And then we also had that false sense of security. We had built this very sophisticated fence and then wall. Well, it was a wall in certain areas and a fence, mostly a fence. And we had our cameras and we had our shooting machines on the border that were controlled by the lookouts. We had balloon cameras. And Hamas just learned slowly, but very slowly, how to basically
decapitate that.
Yeah, cut each one of those. So the balloon camera started to fail in the week leading up to October 7th. And they thought that it was
through a technological thing they were able to.
Yeah, and Israel just thought, oh, there's a glitch, and we'll fix it after the holidays. And after the holidays would have been 2 days later. And so it's those little things, of just underestimating. And if you go back 50 years and a day, was October 6th, 1973. When was the last time that Israel was caught with its pants down?
Yom Kippur.
The Yom Kippur War. And again, also, right, they attacked us on Yom Kippur, just like they attacked us on what was Simchat Torah in Israel.
Yeah.
And it was the same idea, and what they called it in Israel was the conceptia, or the concept, the conception, which was, we're strong, they're weak. Even if they tried to attack, we would be able to stop it. We'll be fine. And that was the mentality. And so it was absolutely avoidable. But it took maybe a little less hubris. I'm not going to lie. I think there's a difference between men and women, and a lot of women were warning, and a lot of the men told them to basically shut up and sit down. To the point that there was
we've seen this in history, by the way.
100%.
With Egypt, we got out of Egypt because of the women,
Yep.
and they told us they saved our lives.
And when the spies came out, and all the men started to weep.
And
the story, for those who might not know, of course, we sent 12 spies into Israel before we were going to go back into our land and start conquest of the land. And when they came out 10 came out with this really horrific report of, we can't do it, there's giants, and we won't be able to survive. And all the men wept. And the women were like, what are we crying for? We've got God. And of course, all the men die out, and the women are the ones who actually get to go into the land of Israel. So yeah, the women, let's be honest, and not even the exodus of Egypt. I mean, the women were the ones who, when the men said, well, they're killing the firstborn males, so let's just not have kids anymore, the women were the ones who, after the day of slavery, go home, look in the mirror, get all attractive for their husbands, and
they dolled themselves up.
Yeah.
And we owe the women our lives.
Yes.
Eishes Chayil.
Amen.
Yes.
And
Women of Valor, for those who don't know.
Yes, and you should read that song. It's really beautiful.
Song of Songs.
And
Shlomo HaMelech.
Yeah. And so the women, there were women who were saying, there was an intelligence officer who said, I kept bringing this up until eventually I was told, if I don't shut up, I'm going to be court-martialed. That's how much there was such a refusal to believe it. And I think, again, that was the male Israeli
it's
approach of saying, we're stronger.
And this can't happen to us.
And this can't happen to us.
A
And there was
little
this-
bit of a denial.
For sure. And I would also say we'd shift focuses. Like Hamas was like the small ragtag terrorist group. Meanwhile, we had Hezbollah to the north, who is not in any way ragtag. I mean, they've been armed, trained, funded by Iran since the mid-'80s. Hell, they trained Hamas because Israel made a huge strategic error in the early 90s, and they had basically exiled a bunch of Hamas leaders to southern Lebanon, thinking we'll get them out. And then they just joined up with Hezbollah, and Hezbollah trained them. They trained them how to build bombs. They trained them how to engage in espionage and how to gather intelligence on Israel. And so we were focused on Hezbollah, which is why a year after October 7th, a bunch of pagers blew up. That attack wasn't planned after October 7th. That was a plan that had been in the works for over 10 years, because that's where our focus was. Hezbollah, the bigger enemy, Iran. Hamas was like, if anyone's ragtag. And then there was also a lot of violence going on in the West Bank at the time, in Judea and Samaria. And so we had really moved our soldiers up north and into Judea and Samaria. And we had less than 800 soldiers on the border that morning. And they
so we
faced
really got caught with our pants
down. And that's the worst way to say it, given what happens in that attack.
And so going back to my initial question, was October 7th inevitable? And what I'm hearing from you is it was not inevitable.
No.
And from a spiritual standpoint, again, I'm not Hashem, I'm not God.
Right.
But my line has been, how many October 8th Jews have come after October 7th?
Yeah.
And sometimes Hashem, we've seen in history that if we don't get the message as a collective, as a group, he's going to have to shake it up a little bit to get our attention and get us to really look inward and say what is truly important to us. So,
and that's a very hard thing to say, because that's again taking responsibility. It's saying, well, we aided in this happening to us, which people don't take too lightly. Think of the Holocaust, right?
And again, that's
Same
as
idea.
we'd say, it's chutzpahdik, but
it's not.
But as a collective, as a group, as a byproduct of this, we have seen a lot more unity.
Just like as a byproduct of the Holocaust, we saw the creation of the state of Israel.
We've seen a lot more togetherness, and we've seen a lot of people say, hey, for the first time, I'm Jewish. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? And I've been quoting that.
But also really people just waking up and realizing that even if they had so little connection to the Jewish community, even if they barely identified as Jews, how all of a sudden they become a target of anti-Semitism.
Right.
And they were like, wait, I guess I am a part of this people. I didn't necessarily...
And I either I own it.
Yes. Or I reject it entirely.
I reject it entirely.
And we've seen those Jews too.
So I guess I would ask you that if, again, going back to a pie chart of Jews, 100%, what is the statistics or the data that would say that there are Jews that have decided, maybe post-October 7th, have decided to side with the other side or not be Zionistic?
Turn anti-Zionist.
Turn anti-Zionist.
I would probably say that it's still under 5%. But if you're a young person, if you're on a college campus, you're going to feel like it's a lot more, because it's almost exclusively in the younger generation, other than people who, like older people who have always been, right? But it's really a feature of the younger generation. And I think that is a whole psychology that we can talk about. It goes to the place of, we talk right now about an epidemic of loneliness, especially in America, and people's feeling of wanting to belong to something and needing to be accepted. And I think young Jews, and specifically I think this happens a lot to people who weren't raised with a solid Jewish identity and with Jewish pride, and because they don't have that connection, instead of becoming October 8th Jews and clinging to the Jewish community, they clung to the people around them who were calling them out or who were saying, what about this? And they said, no, I'm not that. I'm with you. And that way I can belong.
I want to be loved.
I want to be loved. I don't want to be
accepted.
Exactly. And then also there's those who their Jewish identity might be revolving around something like tikkun olam. People who are raised in a more maybe reform environment, or even an even further progressive environment, where for them it's humanity's humanity. And like, I don't see Jews any different than I see anybody else, which again, the way that I would describe that to somebody where I think that's wrong to say is just that, like, it's like saying, well, my family is the same as any other person. Like, my father's not special. He's like any other man. No, he's your father. He's connected to you. And you would take care of your family first in any situation, right? And so that's not, people struggle with that because it's like, oh, we live in, it's like John Lennon's World of Imagine, which like I roll, and everyone should read Zev Magen's book about John Lennon and the Jews, where he just rips it apart. Like, the vision that he lays out is such a horrible world. It's a world without any community. It's a world without any identity, which is tragic because identity creates community, and those are the people you take care of because everyone can't take care of everybody.
Right.
And so it was either and so people who are raised in that more, again, progressive environment, they're sitting there saying, well, yeah, I care about Jews, and like October 7th was awful, but I also very much care about the Palestinians, which I do too, by the way. And I think it's tragic what's happening in Gaza, but they, for some reason, almost refuse to see Hamas or they in the picture, right? So the blame ends up.
Why?
So I don't know. The blame, for them, the blame ends up solely on Israel, and I think that's also because within progressive circles.
And that's what I wanted to ask you, and that was my next question because you're still on it. But to go into that next question, is it why? Yeah, go.
Well, I was just going to say, in progressive circles,
yeah.
we've now been inundated with an ideology of there's an oppressed and an oppressor, and in the dynamic of Israel, it's like, well, who's stronger? Israel's stronger. But oppressor doesn't work. Like, there's strong and weak on both sides, and just because you're strong doesn't mean that you're an oppressor.
They've seen us as the big bad brother who's been the oppressor.
So Hamas is like,
that's been the narrative.
Yeah, and they're the natural result of that. That's what they would argue, which is ridiculous.
And this is called the resilience or
exactly. This is resistance.
Resistance,
rather than it came from a radical Islamic ideology, or it came.
So people are refusing to see that it's coming from a radical Islamic nation.
Yeah.
that
not
just
nation,
but
organization that has indoctrinated.
Right.
A nation.
Because again, the resistance of the years of oppression.
Yeah, and good that you did that.
Of the years of oppression that Israel has participated in, right, is justified.
Yeah. And again, they might not go as far as saying, well, everything that wasn't okay, but you can understand why they would want to attack Israel. It's not okay how far they went. It was barbaric, right? It'll be like October 7th was awful, but. And there's no but there.
They'll make a.
But look at how bad Gaza. There's no equivalence here. There's no equivalence to Hamas coming into Israel with the intention to slaughter everyone versus Israel's response, which is our target is Hamas. And because of Hamas's tactics and how they use their people to protect them, right? Hiding amongst them, that then there's a byproduct of that, which is that tragically innocent people are killed, but we're not going in to slaughter the innocent people. They came in with one intention: slaughter as many Israelis as possible and take as many hostage.
I guess that's my question. So it doesn't matter, again, maybe this is the thing that you've learned over time, but I think part of me and maybe a lot of other Jews that feel helpless in this, mm-hmm, and maybe with TikTok and social media and the narrative that the other side has portrayed, mm-hmm, which, again, I'm not a historian and I don't claim to be so educated, but the facts don't seem accurate in what they're saying. And it's almost like, wait a minute, where is this coming from? And just look at what's taking place. How can you come up with this distortion of such, the facts are there. How can you be saying something completely different? And I was wondering if that's something that triggers you, or that's something that upsets you, or you've just learned to be like, okay.
It doesn't trigger me or upset me, it just motivates me. I'm an educator. You say the facts are there, but people have to be exposed to those facts. That's what it comes down to. And if you're on TikTok and your algorithm is only feeding you, and by the way, the algorithm on TikTok specifically was feeding more anti-Zionism than Zionism, right? Or just more Palestinian narrative than Jewish narrative, right? Then you're not going to see those facts. So the facts are there. So I don't get angry, I just get motivated. Okay, I have to go out and I have to teach more people these facts. And that's what it comes down to. And when I talk to a reasonable person about the facts, they're very open, and more importantly, not just our story.
But if they're already going in saying, I'm anti-Zionism, doesn't matter what you're going to say, Charlotte.
Okay, so something that I always teach is knowing your audience. And I always say in the world, there's 3 audiences when it comes to this. There's the 595. 5% of people are Zionists. Hey, they're on your side. Again, we already unpacked that. You could argue and debate with them, but they believe Israel should exist, and I don't have to convince them of that, and exist in that land. That's important. And then there's the 5% who are anti-Zionists.
It's the bell curve.
Right? Yeah. And then there's the 90% in the middle. Now, the anti-Zionists are the ones who are fully closed-minded. No matter what I say, no matter what I do, nothing is going to change their perspective. And those are not my audience. They're never my audience. There's the 90% in the middle. The 90% of people who don't know, don't care, because they don't know to care, or they're misinformed. And the younger generation, they're that third category predominantly, the misinformed, which is also very hard, right? One of my favorite quotes is, it's easier to fool somebody than to convince somebody that they've been fooled. Because then they have to admit that they've been fooled, and they have to admit that they were wrong. And that's very hard for somebody to do. And so I'm not talking to the 5% or anti, but there are a lot of people in that middle, in that misinformed category, who might come to me and say, well, I'm an anti-Zionist. And I'll say, and I always say to people, when somebody says that to you, the first thing you need to say is, what does that mean to you? Don't assume anything. Why? Because we know that so many people are misinformed. So don't assume that they know what Zionism is. Don't assume that they're defining anti-Zionism correctly. Ask them what that means. And more often than not, you'll find that they're not necessarily against the Jewish state. They might say, well, I've learned that Zionism is racism. And so, of course, I'm against Zionism because I'm against racism. And now I've learned they're not actually an anti-Zionist. They're misinformed. And I can work with misinformed. I can educate about that. Or they might say, like, I just really disagree with the current Israeli government. I have so many issues with their policies. That's not anti-Zionism. That's legitimate criticism of Israel. You're allowed to criticize the government, policies, Israelis, actions. You're not allowed to criticize the existence of Israel. That's anti-Zionism, right? And then there might even be somebody who says, well, I don't understand. Why a Jewish state? Like this religious, and then it's, okay, well, what's Jewish? Jewish isn't, when we said Jewish state, it's not Jewish theocratic state. Jewish people put alongside Christian or Muslim. That's wrong. A Jewish state is like a French state or like a Swiss state, or like a Japanese state. People don't think about it that way. And so when you start to explain, I start to realize, actually, a lot of people who might say they're anti-Zionist realize very quickly they're not. And when you say, so would you be okay with Israel existing? And they're like, I'm fine. Israel, of
So
course.
they're not saying from the river to the sea.
So those, and even people who say that, sometimes you might say, yeah, sometimes you might say, again, it's mob mentality. They're seeing things on TikTok. They're joining in. And then again, when you pull them away from the mob, you have just one-on-one. And you say, do you know what that means? Can we talk about it? Can we unpack it? And then when you say from this river, the Jordan, to the Mediterranean, that's the entire territory, erase Israel and put Palestine. Do you agree with that? Do you think that Israel shouldn't exist at all? And if they say, well, maybe or yes, then it's the, well, why? And then there's a whole conversation you can have as well.
So
and
you've worked it out. You know which
I know the whole path, every path. And I teach this, every path that you could go with somebody. And eventually, again, you'll discover the anti-Zionist who says, that's all Zionist propaganda. Or, which I've heard countless times, where you start to expose people. But why there? Why a Jewish state there? Why did the Jews come from Europe? And you start to explain, well, that's our home. That's where we came from. We're indigenous to that land. They'd say, how? How are you indigenous? Look at you. You're a white person from Europe. And then you explain the history of being exiled to Europe. And let's be honest, like Jews didn't just become white because of conversion. Jews became white because of also horrible things done to Jewish women and through our history, which we saw a repeat of on October 7th. And when you start to explain these things to people, a lot of people I have so many stories. Like I was just getting my nails done the other week, and new person that I found in the new city that I live in sat down, we started talking. I told her where I moved from, which was Israel. She saw my necklace, which says, bring them home now. She said, what's your necklace about? And I started to tell her all about October 7th. She never heard of it. She never heard of it. But I loved when I said, this is what I do. And, I deal with Israel a lot. She says, I don't really have an opinion because I don't know a lot. And that's most people. We don't realize it because the loud ones are the anti-Zionists. Those are the ones we're seeing online. Those are the people. And that's not anywhere close to the majority of people in this world, or especially in this country. Most people don't even think about it. In April of 2024, so like 6 months after October 7th, I went to Houston. My mom's a convert, so her whole side of the family is not Jewish. And I sat down with my non-Jewish cousin, but I live in Israel. She knows I lived in Israel. Sat down with her for lunch, and I said, and she said, Shar, how's it going? I said, how are you? She tells me everything's going on with her. She said, how are you? And I said, it's been rough. It's been a really rough 6 months. And she goes, oh my God, why? Like, what's going on? And I said, October 7th and everything that's happened since. And she just looks at me and she goes, I'm sorry, Shar, what happened on October 7th? And this is my cousin. So this is somebody who should know, right? Or at least maybe but again, if you missed that headline that day,
you didn't get it.
You didn't get it. And if you didn't, and we, Jewish people, anyone who was a Zionist doesn't even understand that, because for us, our feeds were inundated. I could not scroll on Facebook without seeing the face of somebody who was missing, family members looking for their children, who were lying somewhere in a field dead because they were running away from the Nova Festival, being killed by Hamas. And so for us, we don't even understand the concept. How could somebody not know? How could somebody not know? And so I always try to remind people, try to give people the benefit of the doubt, which also takes us back to Judaism, al kaf zchut. We're supposed to judge people favorably, give them the benefit of the doubt first. Don't assume bad. Realize that people are inundated with propaganda and they just don't know. And then you could be that voice. You could be that person. But if you approach it with anger, if you approach it with, why don't you know? Or, now I have to explain. No. This is our responsibility. It shouldn't feel like an obligation. You're part of something. You're part of a movement. You're part of an incredible movement and incredible people. And who's going to explain Jews other than Jews? Who's going to explain Israel other than Zionists? And if you care, that's part of it. And so I look at this and everything that's happened as such an opportunity. And I see every conversation as an opportunity. I could have avoided the conversation. I could not wear my necklace. I wear it on purpose because I want to trigger those conversations. And I would actually say the vast majority of the time, I have the most positive conversations. And I will say, when having these conversations, you can't just tell our side of the story. If I just said October 7th and I told her everything that happened that day, but I left out the last year and a half in Gaza, I would walk away and she would say, okay, that was one side of the story. And wow, she doesn't acknowledge the other side, right? But I tell the whole picture because I'm a human, first of all, and I'm a Jew, and people dying is not something that I like, no matter who they are. Hamas is a different story. If you're trying to kill me, okay, that's another story. But no matter who you are, if you're an innocent, if you're a child, that's painful, and it should be painful. And I know for a lot of Jews, that's an emotion we've really struggled to feel, only because we're so scared. And yes, we're rageful. We have rage because of what they did to us. The barbarism of that day is something we will never forget. We feel it in our bones. And so I understand why now so many of us can't feel it. I say, but we need to, I tend to say a lot to Israelis and to Jews. I say, Hamas took so much from us that day and continue to take so much from us. I'm not going to let them take my humanity. I'm not going to become like them. I'm not going to hate their children the way that they hate my children. And I don't think anybody in this world, I think so many people are chanting, do they really care about Palestinian children? I'm not sure. So I'll be the one to care. And that to me is when I speak in that way, not only people listen, but they see me as credible. And I'm not doing it to just appear credible. I'm doing it because that is genuinely how I feel. And you present that full picture and somebody feels more informed. And then they realize, wow, I can really support Israel and understand their fight to defeat this group that did this to them and ensure that they'll never be able to do it again. And of course, in their fight to get their hostages home. But I can also very much identify with the innocent Palestinians who are being used and abused by Hamas in this whole equation. And they walk away saying, I could be on both sides. And I want people to be on both sides. I want people to be on the side of good, on the side of what's a better future for both of us, because we're there. Palestinians aren't going anywhere. Israelis aren't going anywhere. Jews aren't going anywhere. This is where we live. And so we're going to have to figure it out. And so for me, hate is not going to be the way. And the only way is to just shower it with education and knowledge and rehabilitation and understanding and empathy and all of those things that will create that better future. And so I refuse. I refuse to feed into Hamas's hands. October 7th was meant to destroy us, destroy our hope for peace, destroy our ability to even think that it's possible. Everything that I do, part of it is just to stick it to Hamas, and the other part is because I know that's the right way forward.
And what will be the outcome?
Hopefully a better future for all of us. A de-radicalization. I mean, if only the Palestinians truly understood that we're not here we didn't come to hate them. We're not raised to hate them. It's not taught in our textbooks. We from the get-go said, let's live together and let's thrive together. And that's really the tragedy of it all, is that if those two countries had actually been established side by side back in 1947 when the UN proposed their partition plan, the growth, how we could have worked together to thrive in that land could have been remarkable. Instead, Palestinians had to grow up with horrible leadership whose main focus was destroying Israel instead of developing them. And they got to watch us, the Jewish people, thrive in that land. They got to watch Tel Aviv bloom out of nothing, right? And what are they still living in? What do their communities look like? They're 50 years behind because there was no investment in them. And every step of the way, I find it tragic. When I think of the Palestinians, I don't feel hatred. I feel pity, immense sympathy. How tragic to have to live under that kind of leadership. How tragic to be raised to hate from birth. Horrible. And for me, I can't hate a kid who had no choice. And that's why I really look at Gazans. People should know. Back in 2003, there were 1 million people living in Gaza. Israel withdraws in 2005. Hamas takes over in June of 2007. And now there's 2.2 million people living in Gaza, which means over half the Gazan population only knows a life under Hamas. How do you not feel anything but sympathy for them? Now listen, the hard part is some of those people have grown up to be the adults that then came in and did what they did on October 7th. And sympathy can go to a certain point, but once you're killing me or raping me, there's no sympathy anymore. You need to be killed. But I still think there's hope for that younger generation. It's like the Nazi youth. They watched the regime fall and they were re-educated. They were reprogrammed. And I have to believe.
So can this regime fall?
Yes. I don't
It's not a cancer that's spread throughout the entire.
Well, look at the Arab world. Let's talk about something remarkable that just happened last week that got zero coverage in the world, which was it's a shanda, if you will, which one of my favorite Yiddish words.
It's appalling.
It's appalling. It's a shanda. While the world was busy posting fake photos of people starving in Gaza, which, let's be clear, just because the New York Times put up a photo of a child with a congenital illness who would have looked that way, whether he was being fed or not, there's still hunger in Gaza. We in no way should be denying that. And there were pockets of places where people were starving simply because of how aid was or was not being distributed. But while they were busy talking about that, and then instead of condemning, blaming both Israel and Hamas and the UN, they just chose to just blame Israel, which has been their failure for the last year and a half of only blaming Israel, which has incentivized Hamas and strengthened Hamas. While everyone was focusing on that, 22 Arab countries in the UN, the Arab League, stood up and condemned October 7th, said that Hamas needs to surrender, and said that there won't be a future in Gaza with Hamas in power. Something that Israeli allies, the French, the British, the Canadians, haven't said. They said a little bit. But God, if only we lived in a world where everyone for the last year and a half was saying Hamas surrender and release the hostages instead of ceasefire, we would be in a very different place. Hamas would have no cards on the table, none. Instead, they just kept feeding Hamas. Hamas said, great, we did what we did. We don't really have to do anything. The international community is attacking Israel. We can just sit back. We're taking none of the blame, right? But back to the Arab countries. 22 Arab countries said this. That is a shift that if you had told me 15 years ago something like that would happen, I would say you're crazy. There's no way. So here we are. We live in a world where Egypt made peace with Israel in 1979. Cold peace, but at least secured our borders to a certain extent. Jordan makes peace with Israel in 1994. Also an interesting peace. Another border. And then comes the Abraham Accords of 2020. Well, actually, I should say the Arab Peace Initiative of 2002, which was when the Saudis led an initiative basically passing a resolution saying, we will normalize relations with Israel if you make peace with the Palestinians, right? Which, of course, it's 2002, height of the Intifada. But that was their moment of saying, you know what? We moved on from rejecting Israel's existence. We've now accepted that Israel's here. And now we're making our recognition and our normalization contingent on peace with the Palestinians. And that was already a huge step, which wasn't recognized at all because it was, again, the height of the Intifada. But then the Abraham Accords, 2020. And they're just dropping like flies, joining up, right? The UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, Morocco. And now Saudis, they haven't joined, but they're basically there. They're just trying to get a little bit more from it. But the Arab world is moderating. Think of Saudi Arabia. They produced 18 out of the 19 9/11 terrorists, I believe. And then soon after 9/11, there was a major suicide bombing in Saudi Arabia. And they started to realize, like, oh, these extremists are coming after us. No. And they started reforms. And they shut down the madrasas, the religious Islamic schools. They kicked out the Wahhabists, which was the predominant ideology that was promoting the ideology of Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. And they started to moderate for them. We're not talking becoming, progressive, Western liberal democratic, but making changes. And then in the last 5 years, we've seen Jews being depicted positively in Saudi Arabian media. They stop talking about Israeli aggression and they start talking about Persian aggression, their real enemy, which is Iran, right? And hell, Deborah Lipstadt, okay, the Jewiest Jew, okay? I mean, if you ever see Deborah Lipstadt, I mean, she's got that heavy New York accent, and this is a woman who's
puts Fran Drescher on check.
I mean, yeah, and just brilliant woman, but she's a Jew. She is a expert on anti-Semitism, and she was the special envoy to the Biden administration to combat anti-Semitism. And she went to a conference in Saudi Arabia when she was still in that position. And I'm a big believer in, like, you got to give people positive reinforcement, even if they haven't gone all the way. So, like, Saudi Arabia let women drive, like, I think it was like 6, 7, 8 years ago. And people were like, oh, well done. And it's like, no, well done. Like, don't do it mockingly. It's a step in the right direction. And with every step, you need that encouragement. But I'm looking around at the Arab world, and I'm thinking, how is it possible that in the Western world, in Europe, in America, anti-Semitism is rising, whereas it almost looks like in the Arab world, it's declining. And now somebody asked me over the weekend, somebody said, do you think a Jew is safer now in Dubai or in Amsterdam? You know my answer. It's not even a question. Dubai. Crazy.
Unbelievable.
So I'm sitting here and I'm like, I get that it's hard to believe that people can change because that's just not something that it's hard to believe that, especially given what we've experienced for so long. But there are real life changes that you could see happening in front of our eyes that give me a lot of hope that things can get better. And we have Arab partners who are willing to help us with the Palestinians in Gaza, right? Who also don't want to see that kind of radicalization, who don't want to see that kind of extremism because it's not benefiting them either. And we all have a common enemy, which is Iran. And Hamas is an arm of Iran. So I'm sitting here and I'm like, we're in the most opportune time to actually be able to take advantage of the partners that we have around us who will help. Because Israel can't go in and re-educate. We're still enemies. But if they came in Arabic and they said, look, we've done that. We did the whole extremist thing.
We've reformed. We've done teshuvah.
Yeah, and look at what it gave us. Do you want death or destruction? Or do you want peace and prosperity? Do you want us to help you build the Dubai of the Mediterranean? Or do you want to continue to live in a flattened Gaza? Because Hamas has embedded every bit of their terrorist infrastructure into your life. They dug tunnels from your homes. They stored weapons in your homes, whether you liked it or not. They made it so that Israel had to destroy over, 75% of the infrastructure in the places that they've been in? Because every other building was booby-trapped or had a tunnel entrance or exit, or there was a tunnel underneath, and the only way to destroy the tunnel underneath was to destroy the infrastructure above. And this is what they dealt you. And here are their messages that said they don't care about your lives, that you are literally a political tool for them, that they know that more of you dying is better PR for them. So you want that life, or do you want to live this kind of life? And you could still live here and be Palestinians and be proud, but with a true future ahead of you. And I truly believe when you tap into that, there's always going to be extremists. There's always going to be people who are so devout, so into it that they're never going to let go. And those are the people you lock up. Those are the people you arrest. Those are the extremes. But I truly believe that if you tap into somebody's humanity, a parent, ultimately what they want is a better life for their children, a better future. And after what Gazans have had to live through in the last year and a half, I think a lot of them, that's what they're craving. And I don't think enough people are talking about what we can offer them as a world. what we can offer them. And I know, I mean, Jews might be looking at me right now going, is she serious? Like, is she really, like, how the hell does she have this much sympathy? Or like, why does she care about them that much? And yeah, that's part of my humanity, but it's also just caring about them also means caring about us. Israel is going to be better if we have a better neighbor. Israel is going to be better if we are thriving together. If we don't have to worry about that border. Now, of course, we're always going to have our guard up. We can never get complacent like we did before October 7th. But a better future for them is a better future for me and for my children.
And with that, can I get a amen?
Amen.
Amen. Charlotte, you're a rock star.
Thank you.
You're fantastic. I think we could be here for a good another 2 hours.
If I could just make an appeal, like please, if people can follow the Jerusalem Education Institute, it's Jerusalem EDU. We'll tag it in any videos that we put up. I'm really trying to grow and I'm trying to educate people. It's not the classic social media kind of memes. It's really deeper education. And if anyone out there wants to contribute, it's an organization that is very, very new. We started in January of 2025.
Risalto.
And thank you. And we're still looking for help and resource and people to help us. With donations and anything. So, but really just the reach. The reach is the most important. And if you want to really get educated, we're here for you. And if you want to learn how to have these conversations and really be able to make a difference and feel like you're making a difference every day, because now's the time. If there's no other, now's the time. Jews have to step up. You got to stop thinking that somebody else is going to do it for you. And I know that's hard and you don't really know where to start. And we're here. And there's so many ways to help. So I really appreciate you giving me the chance to talk about this. And it's kind of a hot take, but I hope that it will slowly start to penetrate, because the hatred is blinding us right now and our trauma is blinding us a little bit. But as we slowly heal I'm going to say one more thing. Jews, I always teach that we've been perpetual victims throughout our entire existence. And yet somehow we've never adopted victimhood mentality. We've never become victims. We've decided that instead of being victims, that we're going to be survivors. That we look back on our past and we say, yeah, they tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat, right? It's the Jewish way. Purim was a holiday where they tried to destroy us, and our way of commemorating is reading about it, getting really drunk and dressed up and having a party. That's the Jewish way, right? And right now, we're still in that, we have crossed over into that victimhood mentality, which makes sense because we are still suffering the trauma of October 7th because we still have 20 of our brothers who are languishing in those tunnels, and 30 bodies who absolutely need to have a proper Jewish burial, or a burial, whether they're Jews or not. And I get that. But our strength is in our survival. Our strength is in not adopting the victimhood mentality, but being the survivors that we are. And like you said in the beginning, not just surviving, but thriving. And so I'll give Jews and Israelis the grace and the time that we need to heal. But we have to do it quickly because our strength is in our survival and the fact that we've never embraced victimhood. So be the survivor. Stand up and say, I'm gonna heal, and I'm gonna move forward, and I'm gonna try to do more, and I'm gonna have hope, and I'm not gonna let Hamas take away my humanity, and I'm gonna have even more of it now because of this. That's the strength of the Jewish people, and that's the strength of the teachings that we have within our tradition, which I cling to every day to keep me able to literally get me up in the morning and to keep doing what I'm doing. So I just wanted to end with that because I think sometimes a lot of Jews need those just words of encouragement to keep going and to have hope, And I have a lot of hope. Cautious optimism, but a lot of hope. So I hope people can take strength and hope from that too.
Amen.
Thanks.
Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Wish you continued success,
Amen.
Only blessing.
Amen.
And we want to hear good things.
And back to you also. You do amazing work and really only good things.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. Have a good one. Well done.